They told him to wait outside the funeral. Then the lawyer opened the will. Rain hammered against the black umbrellas lined outside the massive funeral hall, and luxury cars stretched across the parking lot like a silent display of wealth and power. Men in expensive suits walked through the glass entrance while women dressed in black whispered softly beside marble pillars glowing under warm golden lights. And right in the middle of all of it, Marcus stood alone near the entrance doors while security blocked his path like he didn't belong there. Family only, the guard said firmly, keeping one hand near the door handle. Marcus looked past him, into the building for a second. He could already hear the piano music inside, slow and emotional, echoing through the giant room. "I'm here for the service," Marcus replied calmly. The guard barely looked at him properly. Service staff used the back entrance. Marcus stayed silent for a second. Same thing again. Same assumption. He looked down briefly at the old black coat he was wearing. It wasn't flashy. No designer labels. No expensive watch. Visible, just simple clothes and tired eyes after a long flight from Chicago. "I'm not staff," Marcus said quietly. The guard exhaled impatiently. "Look, man, the family requested privacy today. Don't make this difficult." Behind Marcus, another luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. Two rich-looking men stepped out, laughing quietly, before stopping when they noticed Marcus standing at the entrance. One of them frowned immediately. "Everything okay here?" he asked the guard. The guard nodded toward Marcus slightly. "Says he's here for the funeral." The man's eyes moved over Marcus slowly, judging, calculating. Then he smirked. "Yeah, I seriously doubt that." The second man laughed under his breath. Marcus felt the rain soaking deeper into his coat, but his face stayed calm. Because moments like this didn't surprise him anymore. Not after years of them. "I knew William Carter," Marcus said. That name changed the energy slightly. Just slightly. Because everyone in America knew that name. William Carter wasn't just rich. He was one of the most powerful real estate billionaires in the country. Hotels, casinos, office towers, private investments. The kind of man whose death ended up on every major news channel. The first man crossed his arms. "A lot of people knew William Carter," he replied coldly. Marcus nodded slowly. "That's true." But before he could say anything else, another black SUV arrived. This one caused immediate movement. People inside straightened up. Staff rushed toward the curb. Because stepping out of the vehicle was Richard Carter, William's oldest son. Tall, expensive suit, cold expression. The kind of man who looked at people like they either mattered or didn't. Richard walked toward the entrance while adjusting his cuffs. Then his eyes landed on Marcus Dam and instantly narrowed. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Richard gave a short, dry laugh. "You've got some nerve showing up here." The people nearby immediately sensed tension. Marcus stayed still. "I came because he asked me to," Marcus replied calmly. Richard stepped closer now. Close enough for only nearby people to hear clearly. "My father is dead," he said quietly. "You don't get to use his name now." Marcus didn't react emotionally, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. "He told me to come," Marcus repeated. Richard shook his head with visible disgust. "You should leave before you embarrass yourself." That line hung in the cold, rainy air. People nearby pretended not to listen, while clearly listening. Marcus looked toward the funeral hall doors again. Warm lights, soft music, a room full of powerful people. And somehow, he still stood outside, blocked, judged before explanation. Finally, Marcus took one slow step backward. Not because he accepted humiliation, but because he understood timing. "Fine," he said quietly. Richard smirked slightly and walked inside with the others. The doors shut behind them, leaving Marcus alone in the rain. The guard looked awkward now but still didn't move aside. "Sorry, man," he muttered. Marcus didn't answer. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out an old folded letter. The paper edges were worn from being carried too long, but the bottom, William Carter's signature. Marcus stared at it silently for a moment before folding it carefully again. Then he sat down quietly on a bench near the entrance while rain poured across the marble steps. Inside the funeral hall, speeches had already started. William Carter's face appeared across giant screens beside flower arrangements worth more than most people's yearly salary. Politicians were there, celebrities, business executives, everyone praising the billionaire, everyone talking about legacy. But nobody outside knew the truth. Nobody knew why Marcus was really there. About 40 minutes later, the main service ended and guests slowly moved toward the private family hall, where the official reading of the will would happen. Only close family and selected executives were invited. Security tightened near the doors. Then, suddenly, a black town car pulled into the driveway. An older white man stepped out holding a leather briefcase tightly under his arm. People recognized him immediately. Daniel Harper, William Carter's personal attorney for over 20 years. The energy changed instantly. Even security straightened posture. Daniel walked toward the entrance quickly before suddenly stopping when he noticed Marcus sitting alone outside in the rain. Confusion crossed his face immediately. "Marcus," he said. Marcus stood slowly. The guard looked nervous now. Daniel stared between Marcus and security. "Why are you out here?" Nobody answered, because suddenly the situation looked very bad. Marcus remained calm. They said family only. Daniel's face hardened immediately. "Are you serious?" The guard stepped forward nervously. "Sir, we didn't know who he used." "You should have asked," Daniel interrupted sharply. That tone alone silenced everyone nearby. Daniel walked directly toward Marcus, then did something nobody expected. He extended his hand respectfully, not casually, not politely, respectfully. "William wanted you inside beside the family," Daniel said loudly enough for others to hear. The silence after that felt heavy. The guard's face lost color. People nearby exchanged stunned looks. Marcus shook Daniel's hand calmly. No arrogance, no revenge, just quiet control. Daniel looked toward the doors. "Come with me." As they walked inside together, conversations stopped around them one by one. Eyes followed Marcus now for completely different reasons, because perception had shifted. Suddenly the man who looked unwanted looked important. Inside the private hall, the Carter family sat around a massive oak table surrounded by lawyers and executives. Richard looked up first when Marcus entered, and immediately stood. "What is he doing here?" Richard snapped. Daniel placed his briefcase calmly on the table. "He was invited," Daniel replied. "No," Richard shot back. "No chance my father invited him to this." Daniel slowly opened the briefcase, then looked directly at Richard. "Your father specifically instructed that Marcus Reed be present before the will was read." The room went silent again. Richard laughed once in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." Daniel removed an envelope carefully. "I'm completely serious." Marcus stayed near the back of the room quietly, still calm, still unreadable. Richard pointed toward him aggressively. "My father barely even knew him." That sentence hit the room hard, because Marcus didn't defend himself, didn't interrupt. He simply watched. Daniel opened the envelope slowly, then pulled out a handwritten letter. "William Carter left additional instructions regarding Marcus Reed," he announced. Now even the executives leaned forward. Don Yu adjusted his glasses, then started reading. "If Marcus is present, I want him seated before my family hears this." Every eye in the room turned toward Marcus. Richard's expression darkened instantly. "This is ridiculous." But Daniel ignored him. He looked directly at Marcus. "William requested you sit beside me." The room almost looked offended by that sentence. A black man they had ignored outside moments ago, now being seated beside the family attorney. Marcus walked forward slowly and took the seat calmly. Richard stared at him with visible anger. Then Daniel finally opened the official will, and everything changed, because the first words out of his mouth made the entire room freeze. "To my children, I leave my gratitude. But to Marcus Reed, I leave control." Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed properly. Richard blinked slowly. "What?" he whispered. Daniel continued reading calmly. "Majority ownership of Carter Global Holdings, including all controlling shares, properties, and executive authority, will transfer immediately to Marcus Reed." The room exploded. "What the hell is this? This has to be fake." Richard slammed both hands onto the table. "You're telling me my father gave his company to him?" Marcus stayed still. No smile, no reaction, just silence. Because even now, he respected the dead man more than the people shouting around him. Daniel raised his voice slightly. "William Carter signed this personally 6 months ago after his final diagnosis." Richard looked furious now. Why would he do this? That question finally caused Marcus to look up, and for the first time, emotion appeared in his eyes, because only Marcus knew the full answer. Years earlier, before the billions, before the headlines, before the power, William Carter had once been broke. And the man who saved his life during a violent robbery wasn't his rich friends, wasn't his family, it was Marcus's father. A black mechanic from Chicago nobody respected. That one moment created a loyalty William Carter never forgot. And after Marcus's father died, William quietly stayed connected to Marcus from a distance for years, helping him secretly, watching him grow, trusting him more than his own children. Richard stepped toward Marcus now, furious beyond control. "You manipulated him." Marcus slowly stood up and finally spoke. "No," he said calmly. "I was loyal to him when nobody else was." The room fell silent again. Because deep down, everyone knew exactly what he meant. Richard's face turned red with anger, his breathing sharp and uneven as the reality of the room started crashing into him. The executives around the table looked completely stunned, some whispering quietly to each other, others frozen in silence while trying to process what had just happened. Marcus remained standing calmly beside the table, one hand resting lightly against the chair, his expression controlled even while tension exploded around him. "This is insane," Richard snapped. "My father would never hand his empire to someone outside the family." Daniel Harper closed the document carefully before looking directly at him. "Your father considered Marcus family," he replied. That line hit harder than the money, harder than the ownership, because suddenly the issue wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. Richard laughed bitterly and started pacing around the room. "So what now?" he said sarcastically. "He walks in here and takes everything." Marcus finally spoke again. "I didn't ask for this," Richard turned immediately. "But you accepted it." The room went quiet again. Marcus looked at him steadily. "Your father made his decision," he said calmly. "Not me." Richard's jaw tightened. For a second it looked like he wanted to say something worse, something uglier. But dozens of eyes were watching now. Executives, lawyers, investors, people whose opinions suddenly mattered more than emotion. Daniel stood up slowly. "There's more," he announced. Nobody interrupted this time. The room had already changed. Daniel opened another folder and removed several documents. William Carter also left a private recorded message to be played immediately after the reading. That sentence instantly shifted the energy again. A large screen on the wall powered on. For a second there it was only static. Then William Carter appeared on screen, older and visibly weaker than most people remembered him, sitting in a leather chair inside his office. The entire room froze. Even Richard stopped moving. William looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began slowly, "then I'm gone." The room stayed completely silent except for the sound of his voice. "I know this decision will shock people," William continued. "Especially my children." Richard lowered his eyes slightly. "But Marcus Reed earned my trust long before any of you earned my company." Marcus stared quietly at the screen. The old billionaire smiled faintly. "Most of you only knew success version of me," he said. "You didn't know the man before the money." A few executives exchanged glances. William leaned back slightly. 30 years ago, I was bleeding in an alley in Chicago after a robbery went wrong. People walked past me like I was already dead. The room stayed locked onto the screen. One man stopped. William continued softly. "A mechanic named David Reed." Marcus's eyes lowered for a moment at hearing his father's name. "He took me into his garage, cleaned the blood off my face, protected me, fed me, and never once asked for money." Now even Richard looked uncomfortable. William's voice became heavier. "That man saved my life, while richer people ignored me." The silence inside the room felt painful now. "When David Reed died years later," William continued, "I promised myself I would always look after his son the same way his father once looked after me." Marcus swallowed quietly. Because even he had never heard this recording before. William looked directly into the camera again. "Marcus never asked me for favors, never begged for position, never acted entitled." His tone sharpened slightly. "Which is exactly why he deserves this company more than people born into it." That line landed like a bomb. Richard's expression completely changed. Not just anger now. Hurt, embarrassment, truth. William continued speaking. "Money reveals character," he said quietly. "And too many people around me forgot that." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. "Marcus understands struggle," William added. "He understands respect. And most importantly, he understands people." The billionaire paused for a long second. "If my family is angry after hearing this, then maybe I failed to teach them what loyalty looks like." Richard closed his eyes briefly after hearing that sentence. Then the video reached its final moments. William smiled faintly again. "To Marcos," he said softly, "thank you for staying good in a world that kept giving you reasons not to be." Marcos felt emotion hit him harder than he expected, because suddenly this wasn't about ownership anymore. It wasn't about billions. It was about his father. It's about sacrifice. It's about years of being unseen. The screen went black, and the room remained completely silent. No shouting now. No arguments. Just reality, sitting heavily over everyone. Richard slowly sat back down in his chair, staring at the table in front of him. For the first time since Marcus arrived, he looked small. One executive finally cleared his throat carefully. "So," he said nervously, "what happens now?" Daniel looked toward Marcus. Because now everyone understood the truth. The man security refused to let inside was now the most powerful person in the room. Marcus stayed quiet for a moment before finally answering. "Now," he said calmly. He looked around the table slowly. Now we fixed the kind of thinking that almost left me outside in the rain. Nobody had a response for that, because everyone there remembered exactly what happened at the entrance. The assumptions, the judgment, the disrespect. And suddenly the entire room understood something uncomfortable. If Daniel Harper hadn't arrived when he did, they would have humiliated the future owner of the company at his own inheritance meeting. Marcus picked up the old folded letter from his pocket again and looked at it silently for a second. Then he carefully placed it back inside his coat. Because, in the end, that letter mattered more to him than the billions ever would.